right, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about post-traumatic stress and cancer. But first of all, I do want to say that I'm not a doctor. This is all just from my experience and my personal research, and I'm just here to give you kind of my story and let you ask questions at the end of this. Also, we want to give a big shout out to Brightbot for allowing us to have this experience. It is completely original and absolutely fantastic idea. And then also, if you do have questions outside of this, make sure that you go to the website and record a video of yourself asking a question, and someone along the line will come along and video a response to your question. So it's people connecting with people to get the answers that they need from the experiences that we've all had. So it's a great way, and definitely utilize it if you think of any questions at all. Hop on there. So let's get started. Okay, so post-traumatic stress. It's something that has been sloughed off for so many years. But post-traumatic stress disorder, better known as PTSD, is actually a very, very common thing with people that are going through or have had treatment, chemo, or radiation. It's completely and 100% normal, even though for years they didn't think it was true. And honestly, it can happen, like I said, at the time of diagnosis. It can begin, and it could not show up for years down the road. For me, I didn't realize that, nor did my therapist realize that I was dealing with post-traumatic stress. It wasn't until I kind of heard about it and put the pieces together and asked my therapist about it. Hey, it looks like all of these commonalities that are coming together and all these situational things that I've gone through are very close on post-traumatic stress, which afterwards diagnosing me, I mean, it was true. I was suffering from PTSD after going through chemo. So after the emotional roller coaster, it was really, really great to know that I actually had that diagnosis, because it made me feel less of a crazy person. I don't know, labels can be bad, but in this type of situation, it's kind of a wonderful thing at that time. And now I can actually live a more positive lifestyle because of it. But let's kind of continue through this. What is post-traumatic stress anyways? Honestly, it's a psychological disorder. It happens from life-threatening events, which could be cancer. It could also happen from natural disasters and accidents, and like physical assault. So those are the most common ones, and cancer isn't necessarily common. But if you think about it, cancer is a life-threatening event, and that can really have some hold on your mental processes. So yeah, it's very normal for a cancer survivor to have things like anxiety and fear and worry and dread, especially right when it happens or shortly after, because you don't know if it's going to come back. But when does it come PTSD? It's when these things are not going away and they're affecting your everyday life. So that could be a sign, right? Well, what are the symptoms or what are the signs of PTSD? Surprisingly, there's a ton. I'm not going to go through this entire list, but there's a lot. Avoidance is a thing. You're avoiding people or the people that used to be around because you feel like you're going to break or whatever. Feelings of feeling guilty or hopelessness or shame. Trouble sleeping or being angry. Or a huge one, something that I definitely experienced, was self-destructive behavior. So you go through and you're doing so well and you survived, but mentally you can't deal with it, so you do lots of shots at the bar. Way too many. And that's definitely something that happened with me. But also there can be nightmares and flashbacks. You just dream about it, and that sucks. You're living your reality, a normal life, and your dreams are torturing you with the effects of going through cancer and chemo all the time. Another thing that was huge for me, you continuously focus on the cancer experience. I was talking to anybody and everybody about it for probably after the first year, for that between the first and second year. I talked about it all the time. I had a lot of pain and anguish with some relationships that affected me while I was going through chemo, and I wanted to be understood. And so any chance that I got, and usually it was in a bar setting, I was, I don't know, I feel like I was annoying people with my discussions, which I probably was. I probably should have been in therapy at that time, but it completely consumed me. It's what I thought about all day, every day for the most part. Being irritable or emotionally numb or loss of appetite. And for me, also memory or concentration problems. I feel, not to label things again, but I feel more ADD during these times now. I have a hard time concentrating on one thing at a time, and I switch all over the place. Oops. Let's see if we can go back. So things can be great, and everything's going well. You realize that you are dealing with PTSD, but there are also things that can trigger it. So, for example, anniversaries. I have mine coming up on the 4th. That can be a trigger. So things are going well, you've gotten therapy, everything's fine, but certain things will trigger it. Going to the doctors to get your next checkup, or having to be diagnosed with something. They can also all bring those feelings of pain and anguish, or depression, sadness, where you feel uncontrollable with your feelings, and you spend a day on and off crying all day, and you have a hard time really focusing back on what you're supposed to be doing with your life. But there are a lot of ways that you can get help. Few of the mechanisms that I use are all associated here. You can keep a diary. Anytime that I'm feeling emotional and I don't have somebody to talk to, I write in a journal. And it can be the most utterly ridiculous thing. But as long as I get it out and there's some point of exporting those feelings onto something else, that really helps. Exercise. The endorphins themselves give you those happy feelings and happy thoughts that kind of counteract the symptoms of PTSD. Finding a support group. Recently, I found a Facebook group that I joined as well, and just hearing everyone feeling the same things as I do really brings things into perspective. There's a lot of times where you can't talk to friends and family because you feel like you're bothering them. People that are going through the same things within a support group really give you that sort of stability that you need in order to cope with what you're dealing with. Seeing a counselor or other mental health professional. Sometimes it gets so bad that maybe you do need medication for it. You are depressed about it. Seeing a psychologist or a psychiatrist, there's nothing wrong with that. But at least there's someone that is way more informed on this type of mental disorder than other people. And you're not annoying them because you're paying them. So you can tell them anything you want. And also one thing that really also helps is dealing with PTSD and cancer, staying informed about your type of cancer. Is it likely to come back? Is it not likely to come back? Doing that research and talking to your doctor about that and getting that information will really help subside those anxious and worried thoughts, because you know the statistical possibilities. So it helps. It really does. So then again, let's go back and talk about how this affected me. I deal with it not every day. It's become less and less, but it's definitely affected my relationships. I went through a breakup while I was going through chemo, and afterwards we dated again after. And because of that, and because of the fear and anguish that I had with dealing with cancer, those fear and anxieties didn't go away when we reignited our relationship. I was more paranoid and more sad and had a hard time dealing with it. And because at the time I wasn't diagnosed, it made things even harder because, I mean, your partner in crime is kind of thinking you're nuts, and you're kind of thinking you're nuts, and there's nothing you can do about it, but all you want to do is fix yourself, but you can't help but feel this way. Friendships. I mean, people don't want to hear about the situation over and over and over again. It gets old. It really does. So you don't feel like you can talk to your friends or family because there's that anguish. And that's where things like therapy helped me. I had a hard time eventually talking to friends years down the road about that situation or about how I was feeling, because I didn't feel like they wanted to hear it anymore, and I didn't want to bother them. It was the complete opposite. They were always there for me, but when it's bothering you that much and you feel like it's consuming you, you feel like you reflect that on them and it consumes you too. So that kind of like really sucks. Constantly feeling like there's something wrong with me. Like I said earlier about having my anniversary come up, now I'm looking for things like, oh, am I sweating too much at night? Is it coming back? And then that like anguish and worry. But I've also learned that my doctor's pretty awesome. And if I just give them a call, they'll let me come in and they'll do a checkup on me. And it's not a big deal. Like, they'll settle down my obsessive thoughts that I'm still sick. And sometimes it also affects my job. I was actually pretty emotional about it today, just things coming up and thinking about the whole process of PTSD. And here I am at my work. Luckily, I'm just at a computer and I'm really not interacting with anybody, but like I'm uncontrollably silently crying. And there's just nothing I can do. I'm trying to make it go away. It stops for a little while, but then the thoughts creep back in and I start crying again. And I feel absolutely ridiculous, but knowing that this is what I'm going through and just this is what I'm dealing with, it's something that's normal and I'm able to cope and not let it completely consume me. So yeah. So that's all I have when it comes to the presentation part of this. I wanted to leave things a little more open this time around and really let you guys have the floor for questions, because I know there has to be a ton. It's a new thing. It's a weird situation. So any questions that you have, please throw them at me. I'm more than happy to talk about them. And I don't feel any tears coming on, so we'll be okay.
Janie, what if you find that you have a friend that ever so often they go into their mode whereby they just make themselves not available to anyone. Mm-hmm. You know, you may be calling them on the phone or try to visit or something. And for some reason, you know, they just want to keep to themselves. Mm-hmm. Could that be, and you don't know that they was ill or anything. You don't know, they haven't gone through any serious illnesses or anything like that.
Sure.
What would you contribute that to some sort of PTSD also?
No, I wouldn't necessarily contribute that to PTSD. typically to be defined by as PTSD. There has to be certain things in play, like it is a traumatic life event, something crazy. So the list that I put in front, whether it is an illness, something extreme like as cancer, or maybe I wouldn't be surprised if you were diagnosed with maybe MS. Some of those more serious things, maybe even a heart attack. But if it sounds more like, for me, more of like an avoidance behavior, and with that, all you can do to be a good friend is just continue to reach out. I know it gets exhausting, but if you care, you just continue. Maybe you just send a card or a letter. Sometimes you can't always get through to them via voicemail or text and they don't respond, but doing simple and nice gestures like letters or cards is a great way just to let them know that you care. And it's also extremely inexpensive, so you don't have to put money into flowers or anything like that. But the persistence of showing that you care is also very important too. So don't give up.
Okay. All right.
Janie, I have gone through, I think it's probably PTSD, and did not know about it after my heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I just couldn't be bothered with anybody.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole slew of different forms. There are milder versions. Mine wasn't the most intense. I didn't have insane flashbacks like people, for example, war heroes. They'll have tons of flashbacks, and it might not just be when they're sleeping. It might be in the middle of the day, and it's literally your mind waters back into that situation. But yeah, I mean, wanting to be alone, or just the thought of it consuming you all the time, and that stress that's constant and over and over and over. I mean, it is a possibility that could be something. And like I said, it could just be a milder version of it. You can't really truly be diagnosed. You don't just want to go on to WebMD and go, hey, do I have all these symptoms? Something you would want to talk to a therapist about first. But it is a possibility that it could have been something like that, yeah.
Yeah, because until now it's been 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes I just want to be by myself.
Sometimes
Yeah.
I just want to be by myself too. I completely understand that. And I mean, I was that way even pre-cancer. Sometimes I was just absolutely tired of people. But yeah, it's a long lasting thing. It's something that doesn't necessarily go away in a day or even a week of therapy. Sometimes it is a extensively long running thing that you have to deal with for years and years and years. So I hear you on that for sure.
So Janie, you said that if you had it disrupted like your sleep, you would have nightmares. How about insomnia or anything like that?
A little bit, nothing too crazy. There was times where I would wake up out of something and I just couldn't go back to sleep. And I also reflected my stuff on other people while I was sleeping. So I would wake up in absolute tears thinking like one of my family members was now like sick or dying or something. And I'd have to call them or text them just to make sure that they were okay in order to get that peace of mind before I went to sleep. But yeah.
So you would say you're a little paranoid then when it came to
yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
Janie.
Yeah.
Did you find, or have you found that maybe you're going about your daily life and then out of the blue, maybe a certain sound or smell or taste would remind you of the experience, maybe treatment or anything like that? Have you had anything like that, or?
For me, sound, no, and not really seeing anything, but the smell thing was. For me, it's like the rubbing alcohol smell, or even just really bad vodka, reminded me of the hospital, and kind of would bring back that memory and that sick to my stomach feeling that I got from being at the hospital.
And I would guess that the length of your treatment or the length of your illness would kind of determine just how much of post-traumatic stress you'd experience, right? I would think.
No, actually, it's not necessarily how long it is. It affects every person differently. I saw a statistic recently for just women with breast cancer, and 80% of women that are going through treatment have some sort of PTSD. A lot of that dropped down to like 20% after a year. So everyone kind of feels those same experiences. But I mean, part of it is just life situational too. Like, are you going through a hard time in your life outside of dealing with your treatments? Breakups, death in family, things like that also puts a combination on that. So sometimes it's not the length of the treatment, but also your other life factors that are involved with how long this could last for you.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So Jamie, then you're thinking then that there's certain triggers that set off someone into that distress mode?
Yeah, it absolutely can. You're going to have, it's not something that, you're going to have great days, great weeks, great months. I feel a little more anxiety and things this time of year when it gets closer to my anniversary date of diagnosis. And then I start stressing about it again. And so usually I try to get a doctor's appointment in and around this time to help with that like mental stability and really kind of making me feel okay. So I got that extra info and that extra input. But there are so many different things that can make it happen. Say you have a breakup. Say you went through a breakup through treatment and you have another breakup. I mean, your feelings of not being good enough or lack of purpose, like I don't know what I'm doing with my life, a loss of a job, like you just don't know what you're going to do with your life anymore because you don't have a direction. That could also be a trigger. It's very dependable per person.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, Janie, do you still have a port in?
No, I don't. My port is gone. It was right here. I actually had it taken out in October of whatever, 4 years ago, October of 2013. So it was approximately 3 months after my diagnosis. They felt really good about about where I was at, so I didn't need to keep it in longer. But sometimes they keep those in for up to 6 months after treatment.
So do you have a scar from it? Is that a trigger for you also every time you see that scar, or not really?
No, the scar is kind of not too bad, and really it's very, very, very light. You can hardly see it. I used to touch it all the time, but actually touching it actually breaks down scar tissue, so there's no like lump in there. Something though that can be a trigger for me is not the actual scar itself, but I still do have scar tissue underneath my arm, and it can get sore sometimes, and that's where my actual cancer was. And sometimes I'm thinking, oh, is there another lump there? I don't know. So I'll sit there and like palp it and see if I can find anything. And it can become a little obsessive, but there's nothing there. I make my doctor touch it. I'm like, am I feeling something weird? But no, it's completely 100% normal and just scar tissue. So I just kind of have him help me out on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea, like, is there a certain category that would be more affected, like say older, younger, male, female?
No, actually, there isn't a certain category. It affects everyone differently. So not that I know of, but it's definitely something I can look into.
Yeah.
So, not to say that this is anything like a suicide prevention or anything like that, would there be a hotline of some sort for people who have gone through something like this and now feel as if they're going through PTSD?
I think specifically when it comes to like people that have dealt with cancer, there's not a specific hotline for that, but there is a hotline for people with post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you for sure know that you have it, yeah, there's the ability to call somebody for it. And I mean, sometimes it might be necessary to do the suicide hotline prevention. I mean, obviously people are going to be way more aware and capable when they realize somebody's dealing with PTSD, so they can have different ways to talk people down or help them out or calm them down. But that's where things like having, like for me, my friend Craig that lives in England, we both went through the same thing at the same time and both also dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder. So when he's my person, so he's the person that I call when I feel like I'm absolutely crazy. And there's been times when he's left the pub in the middle of the night in England and gave me a holler. I mean, he's, like they say, pissed drunk, but at least he has somebody he knows to talk to about it. So it's great to try to find a friend or make a friend to help with those situations, because they pull you, quote unquote, off the ledge from feeling crazy. You're like, no, you're completely normal. You're allowed to feel that way.
I have a couple questions. First, your presentation indicated that there are a number of triggers, of course, simple, just being diagnosed with cancer, and then actually having a cancer recurrence. Both of those things would be would trigger stress. But when you're dealing with a situation in which you feel stressed, is it because you are concerned about, you are reliving what it was like when you were experiencing the cancer, or are you concerned that you might get cancer again? And is that is the fear of getting cancer again, even without a cancer diagnosis, even without a recurrence, is that enough to put you into a stressful situation?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Just having the fear of it is, and it can give me things such as having intense migraines or the uncontrollable sobbing, and just kind of like feeling of anguish and loss of hope. The thought of it can, I have been in that place. I haven't been in that place in a while, which is great. Thankfully, most of the time, all of these symptoms fade. But yeah, I mean, the potential diagnosis or even just the thought of it, when you obsess about it, can trigger the stress. And it's figuring out or using one of those coping mechanisms to pull yourself out of it, because it can become overwhelming.
Thank you. I've got another question.
Sure.
If you're going through treatment and money is an issue, maybe because you don't have health insurance, or one, I'm not talking about you specifically, I'm just talking about in general. If one didn't have health insurance and they were, they had to get through this treatment, and, the money or the lack of money would be a huge stressor. And then, it's to be hoped that this person gets through cancer and it doesn't come back. But that financial stress, that fear of medical bills and any other financial consequence as a result of having cancer, I would think that would be enough to cause me to live, or to cause one to live in stress constantly. And so, what would you suggest to someone who doesn't have health insurance, who is stressed about paying for medical bills and other services that are related to a cancer treatment? How could you help them get through that without, the stress that you're describing?
Right. That is a great question. Luckily, in most cities and places, more so in college places, there is the opportunity to still see a therapist and not have to pay for it. They kind of do a give what you can type of deal. So if you can't give anything, you don't give anything, but you have the opportunity to actually go talk to somebody when you are feeling so stressed about those situations. And when it comes to the financial burdens of things, there is always a way. And your hospitals and your doctors are actually, they just want you to be better, and they will find a way or find somebody to help you with those finances. Whether it is finding or utilizing, saying like the Cancer Society, and finding some sort of donation or grant to help you recover some of the lost funds that you have, because yeah, it is a financial burden. I was very fortunate in order to have my hometown throw a fundraiser for me. So I wasn't $3,000 out of the pocket, because yeah, I had insurance, but I still had to pay a $3,000 copay each year, which is for someone in their 20s who's making like $35,000 a year at the time and has student loans, is a huge burden. But asking for help from a therapist, you can get a free one, or asking for help from your doctors to point you in the right direction to help with finding that financial stability. People are here to help. As much as it doesn't seem like it sometimes, people are here, and there is always a way. Maybe I'm just being very positive about it, but there's always somebody that can at least point you in the right direction, and is willing to listen and help you figure it out, so you don't have to do it alone.
Thank you. I've got a question. I just forgot it. When I remember, I'll come back.
Are you on any other medication for the cancer?
No.
No, that's
I
it.
haven't been on any medication, and I've actually been on 0 medications for PTSD as well. Everything that I've utilized are the basic coping mechanisms that I shared with you, such as journaling, speaking with somebody else, and exercise.
Okay.
Yeah, my question is that there's certain conditions get worse with stress. And so the first thing a doctor will say is, your first requirement is to avoid situations that cause you stress. So would you say that cancer is one of those conditions that get worse with the stress? And if it is, then it really would seem that avoiding stress is part of the prescription, is a requirement for staying healthy. What do you think about that?
I don't know if you can specifically avoid stress. There's so many stressors in the world, and different, like, life is crazy and things come up. To completely avoid stress would be, for me, locking myself in my house. I don't think it's necessarily 100% a possibility. Maybe if you have the luxury of money to do that, maybe you can. But a lot of people have to work or just deal with the world. But again, it's going back and learning different ways to cope with those situations that you're in, or say talking with maybe like an employer, and maybe there's a different position that you could do that is less stressful on you. That's the only solve I have. Any others? I know we asked a lot. All right, well, that is more than okay. Obviously, if you have any other questions, throw them up onto the site. I try to check that often too, to see if I can answer any of your questions randomly. So record them and post them. We'd love to hear them, okay? Thank you all so much for coming, and hopefully we'll talk to you like next week or something.